Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, on Ancient Secrets Revealed, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwar Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Beautiful spring day here. How you doing, Scotty?
Good.
You good? That's
Yeah.
good. All right. Well, this is an interesting couple of interesting topics today, I think, and you know. Well, I guess I should start with the beginning. There's a guy named Victor Davis Hanson, and he wrote a book. What did he call it? The End of Everything. It's a bestseller. You can get it on Amazon. You can do the audio version if you're interested. When I first saw the title, I didn't really care for it. The End of Everything. It's pretty negative, But actually, the subject is quite good. And it made me think about, this was about 10 or 15 years ago. I was going for a walk with somebody here at Mount Soma, walking down Mount Soma Boulevard. And I just said to them, can you imagine the communist Chinese ever marching down Mount Soma Boulevard, an army of them, And she said, no, she said, I can't. And I said, exactly. And I said, and that's the problem. And it's interestingly enough, it's like 15 years ago now, and 10 or 15 years ago, and this book came out, The End of Everything. And what it's about, it's really more of a history book, I understand. I haven't read it yet, but I will. And I understand it's essentially a history book. It looks at the Aztecs, it looks at, I think, the Romans, Byzantines, Byzantine Empire, and kind of analyzes what brought those civilizations to their demise. And it's quite good. And we talk about the phase transition, that we're in a phase transition right now. And Lord Krishna told Mother Divine that it would happen right now, 5,000 years ago. And sure enough, we are in a phase transition. Now, in the book, Victor Davis Hanson talks about, the demise of civilizations. And that's certainly a phase transition, but the phase transition really on a bigger picture, a deeper level, this particular phase transition is much more significant. It's a major cycle. And what that is, it's a phase transition from Kali Yuga to Sat Yuga, from an age of ignorance to an age of enlightenment. And it's been predicted many times throughout, even into ancient history. And it's happening now. And, as difficult as it can be, because, you just watch the news and you're witnessing all these horrible things, wars, threat of nuclear annihilation, moral decay in so many ways. And you might feel like, oh my gosh, the end of everything is near. Everything is going to get destroyed. But the good news is this is a particular period where we're transiting into a brief period, maybe 1,000 years or something, of Sat Yuga, age of enlightenment, right in the midst of Kali Yuga. And so in that regard, as unpleasant as it can be to witness all the terrible things that are happening to people, if we take a step back, in a way, it's a real privilege to be alive right now and have the opportunity to witness that transition. Where did I see just recently? Who was it that said that all the books that have ever been written are not true? And when I first heard that, I said, well, that's pretty crazy. But then my understanding became that there's this bigger context, the nature of existence, the idea that there's a unified field, a source of infinite coherence and harmony, what commonly people refer to as God, unified field being the objective perspective on it, and personified God being the subjective, but it's two sides of the same coin. And then phase transitions, even the demise of civilizations, and I've talked about this, geez, for decades, have a night, Scotty, where for a civilization to become great, it has to be functioning in harmony with nature. Because otherwise it wouldn't rise up. Nature wouldn't support it. Now, it's a little bit like, well, there's a statistical component to it, because like there can be an individual who lives a terrible life selling drugs, or I don't know what they're doing, and they seem to be affluent and happy and, living the high life, but that's where the statistical component comes in, because that's one individual. And so I compare it to a little bit like if you take a dump truck full of sand and you dump the sand out the back of the dump truck, every time you're going to get a pile. It's a bell curve. But if you take a closer look, you'll see that a grain of sand here or there may have hit the ground a certain way and bounced all the way to the front of the truck. But that's what a bell curve is about, the probability. But you're going to get, a pile every time. And like that, for a civilization to prosper, okay, you might have a few individuals here or there, but the bulk of the group consciousness, you see, of the civilization has to be in harmony with nature. Otherwise, the civilization wouldn't rise. And so when it says the end of everything, and the author does a great job talking about, how that comes about on a surface level, what sort of things happen, the economy collapses, etc. But what underlies that, the bigger picture, the deeper meaning is that what's the degree of harmony that a civilization is living, the degree of harmony with natural law, with nature. And what happens over time, the civilization takes off because it's in harmony with nature, it's powerful, incredible, but then it starts to decay. People kind of just start coasting or riding the wave, and what made that civilization great in the first place is kind of forgotten. And then the civilization crumbles. And so it either needs to be regenerated at that time of decay, or it will collapse. And that's what's different about this time, is that that regeneration is happening, that phase transition. Now, depending on when you catch the transition determines if there's an Armageddon, and then, okay, now enlightened civilization takes over, or if you can catch it before the demise is too severe, and right now we're in that time period, and infuse then harmony with natural law back in, then the civilization will be revived, and a lot of suffering and horrible things will be avoided. So that's the only other comment. I mentioned this book to somebody, and they said, "Oh, Victor David Hanson," and they just boom, right away. I don't like the guy, or I don't know why they didn't, but here I want to generalize that as well. We have a tendency, as individuals in our society, we have a tendency to just look at one small facet of a person. It's like we mono-dimensionalize a multi-dimensional being. And that's the pigeonhole. That's how we view that person. And when their name comes up, boom, where do we go? We just go to that one small facet, and that's, in our opinion, who that person is. And it's not right, really, Is all this making sense, Scotty?
Yeah. One thing that was coming to mind too is it's like everything that we know is going to be destroyed or something like that. Is that also just kind of like the way society is going, and the things that we're kind of locked onto aren't the real things, so it can't be sustained?
It's interesting. It's like the society. What happens is it just starts
Yeah.
going more and more out of tune.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily jump out of tune. It's a process, but it's out of tune. Now, either it's going to continue to go out of tune and then meet its demise, or just like you can tune a piano or a guitar, you're going to tune it back up and then regenerate the civilization. And now here's another interesting thing, though, is that when we try to understand ancient Egypt, for example, we're looking through the lens of time. So we're looking at the tail end of that civilization right before, even after it collapsed. So what we're looking at is the mentality of that civilization in its tail end, not in its best years, but in its worst years. And so we can say, well, let's try to figure out, how it was in its golden age. Well, they couldn't even figure that out then. And so how are we going to go through that distortion and find the refinement? So the way the refinement is found to understand the greatness of every civilization is to find it within ourselves, to find that transcendental essence within ourselves, and to function from that place. It's a good point.
Also, isn't there the component of how you talked about sometimes how Darwin, the theory couldn't have happened because it just doesn't happen randomly like that.
It happened too fast. Even statistical analysis of biologists say it happened too fast. They're missing something.
But that the purity of the transcendent that's welling up is the thing that's guiding that faster or whatever. And that's it's also guiding us as a civilization too. So it's almost like all this stuff is going to break off because it's not in alignment, but there's a coherence that's pushing. It's not like it's going to just.
It's exactly right. Sometimes it's likened to there's this big reservoir, this big lake in the sky, so to speak. And it's accessible to everyone, but you have to be the one, you have to connect to it. And it's like that within the depth of our being. We all sense divinity. We may not use the word divinity, but we all sense it. But the question is, to what degree are we living it? And how can we realign the surface of our life with that depth? And that actually brings us to the next subject I wanted to talk about today. I was talking to somebody about the world today, and no, it wasn't even the world today. It was about the challenges, because in life we meet challenges, and certainly with Mount Soma, we're having to remodel the kitchen, and one challenge or another comes up. It's moving right along, but it's with challenges, and then there's also cash flow, and I work with all of that. And somebody recently asked me, "Are you worried?" And I just responded right away, and I actually liked my response, even though it just kind of came out. I said, "Well, that depends on the level of my being that I'm aligned with in the moment." Because you see, and it's interesting, like a lot of the guests from India will come and they'll say, well, Shiva will take care of all of this, or take care of you, and whatever. Mount Soma is blessed, and it's very interesting actually, because on one level, we can feel that. I mean, Shiva, the transcendent personified correlate, and we're connecting to that, we're working with that. But then on the personality level, there's just a whole different level, and that's all about polarization, opposites. That's why they call it relativity, because one is relative to the other. There's no absolute value in that sense on that level. It's rooted in that, but it's not. But see, if we lose ourselves to that dualistic value, then that worry, for example, or any number of different things, anger, hatred, any negative emotions like that, take over. And so that's one level of our being, a very superficial level. There's a deeper level of our being where we know that we're fine, everything's fine. We know, even though on the surface, we may not be willing to phrase it this way, on a deeper level, we even know that we're immortal, that we're going to live forever, that when the body drops off, we go on. But you see, on the surface level, if we have a belief system that we're clinging to, then we might not even be able to accept that. And in fact, that person that said that all the books that have ever been written are wrong, it's kind of the way I see it is what that person really was alluding to, was that unless that context is there, unless there's that understanding, and it's not just, oh, God will take care of everything. There's a sophistication to the understanding. And unless that then surface of life is integrated with that deeper understanding, you come up with either nonsense or blind faith or what we call astral echoes, because there could be true. It's an echo of truth. It's a simplistic understanding of a profound principle, and which is why I like to say echoes of truth, perceived as truth, hold truth at bay. And so how do we reconcile it? How do we work with that? Again, what level of your being are you aligned with in the moment? And in the moment, even a highly evolved person is going to have periods of doubt, periods of fear, periods of worry. But how firmly is it tethered to that transcendental level where we know that everything's fine, everything's well and wisely put? The essence of everything is divine, but boy, is it tethered somehow seemingly so loosely that we lose the connection. And then even our belief in, oh yeah, everything's going to be fine, it's just an astral echo, an echo of truth perceived as truth, which holds truth at bay and just becomes some sort of a simplistic notion, you see. So what's the way around all of this, if to say it that way? Integrating the physiology so that the surface of life more and more is functioning in harmony with the depth. But now it's an interesting principle too, because this is Kali Yuga. And so we're functioning in a global consciousness that's very much aligned with a superficial paradigm of perspective that is an echo of truth at best. and so that's our world. That's where we live. That's the people we relate to. We're all functioning within that, the way we have said it in the past is, dirty fishbowl. They say that some people say there's no such thing as a Brahmarshi, very highly evolved individual in Kali Yuga. Others say, well, there are, but they're on another planet, or there are, but they're hiding out in a cave in the Himalayas until the group consciousness clears, what have you. But the point is that even highly evolved people who are functioning in the world at large are subject to a polluted fishbowl, and so to relate to the world, to interact with the world, you're interacting with that mentality to some degree. It's unavoidable unless you're one of those guys living in a cave somewhere. I really enjoy these signs. I've talked about them before outside of these Baptist churches here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And I saw one that I liked. I like them all, really. They're a lot of fun. This one said, "We are redeemed by God's grace. We are redeemed by God's grace." And I was riding along with somebody, and I said, "What do you think that means?" And he wasn't sure, But what does that mean? We are redeemed by God's grace. Well, it's just what we're talking about. There is that unified field that is welling up through all levels of existence, and we gravitate back to that just as naturally as water on top of a mountain makes its way back to the ocean. And so we're gravitating, so we're redeemed by God's grace. it's the foundation of our being. That's the foundation of our existence. That's what human evolution is all about. Human evolution is certainly not about aligning with some paradigm on the surface, you know. So I just thought it was beautiful. I love those quotes, you know. Here's a question for you. Is it appropriate or wise to question your relationship with God? And maybe even more extreme, is it appropriate or wise to encourage others to question their relationship with God? Well, in a sense, as we evolve, our relationship with everything, our understanding of everything deepens. We see it on a deeper level. And so if we have some superficial notion of divinity, of God, and we cling to that and try to hold on to it, it's almost like, okay, maybe we're meditating and evolving, but we're resisting it at the same time. And so we need to be open to coming really from deeper levels of our being and integrating that with our surface perspectives. And see, that's really, you know, a lot of people are turning their back on religion, which is very unfortunate. But why are they doing that? It's because there was an old paradigm before people were even really that rational. Scientists were burned at the stake for being scientists. But now we live in a more scientific age, and that's a good thing in the sense that now we're having the ability to fathom deeper levels of understanding. And in our evolution, you know, we have a right and left brain. There's understanding, and there's also experience. And so one facilitates the other. It's like the steps of progress. You need 2 feet to move forward. And as we do that, then our understanding deepens. It ceases to be a fanaticism or a narrow perspective. It becomes an ever deepening insight into the nature of life, the nature of existence, the nature of God. Okay? So to question your relationship with God isn't a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. Like Adi Shankar has said, discernment is the path of evolution. As we discern, our understanding transforms, you see. And see, even with the Shastras, you know, the Shastras are kind of like the Upangas. The Shastras are kind of like, you could look at it, let's say it this way, you could look at it like it's a rule book. It's like if God was going to write something and say, okay, here's what you can do to evolve faster, you know? And those are the Shastras. But now see, even the Shastras, if you read the Shastras and cling to an understanding of them on a certain level and become fanatical about it, then that process is going on even with the Shastras. And that's why we call them the secret doctrines. You know, they're secret because even if you've read them, they remain a secret because we have to evolve. And as we evolve, our understanding of them deepens and we get closer and closer to the secret. Okay. So humility is the flip side of wisdom. And one other thing I want to throw out again, with so much going on in the news with all this right now, racism is cultural integrity gone insane. Cultural integrity is a good thing. Racism is just crazy. Okay? And I think that's it, Scotty, unless there's something more.
No, I think that was it.
Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. I appreciate you listening, and we'll talk with you again next